Hello, and welcome to Reawaken the Dream, a course for the writer mom and anyone who has to write in small fragments of time because you don't have enough time to be able to sit down and write in an extended period of time. This is the place where we help you make those disconnected fragments of time create a coherent story with the aid of the character profile tool, which will give you the power of living characters. We are on lesson 24 and our 19th character trait. So if you're brand new here, you might want to start back with an earlier lesson, although you're welcome to sit in any case. So without further ado, let's do a quick review of the last lesson. Last time we talked about gratitude, and we said that gratitude begins in the heart and then is outwardly expressed to others. We had our animal model of the apocryphal lion with a thorn in its paw, and the thorn is taken out by a human, and then years later, the lion refuses to harm the human out of gratitude. The struggle of gratitude, we said, was threefold. That we have to first notice that we are being given a benefit for which we ought to be grateful. That has to do with not taking things for granted. We have to feel grateful and not just log something in a gratitude journal. And we want to remember to express our gratitude to the other person so that they are aware that we do feel gratitude towards them. We said the lost state was not doing any of these things, which is just taking someone for granted, taking advantage of other people, and just crediting oneself for all the good things in one's life. The victory state of gratitude is achieving all of those stages and never taking advantage of another person. Well, we're ready for another empathy trait today, and it's part of the same group that began with gratitude, the little subgroup in empathy. Our trait this week is generosity, a familiar enough term. So let's just begin with the scenarios. Frederick had more money than he ever dreamt of having. His venture turned out to be wildly successful. But he wasn't as happy as he thought he would be. When he was in the middle of all of his work, he kind of stopped answering Cindy's text messages, and now she won't return his phone calls. He's finally got enough money he could actually buy a yacht, but he's been hanging around with this guy Doug, who's a yacht salesman, but he kind of realizes that Doug probably isn't really his friend. Doug probably just wants to sell him a yacht. And those girls at the yacht club, he was sure they were gold diggers. And come to think of it, Cindy, if she did come back to him now, it would probably be just for the money. Generosity, the lost state. Kevin, on the other hand, has never been rich. And he hasn't been poor. Well, he's kind of poor in college and when they were first married, and those years that they really struggled to get those student loans paid off. But they haven't been poor since, and now they were settling into their new home. And as they folded up the drop cloth after finishing their painting of the master bedroom, they looked at one another and said, "What color should we paint the little bedroom?" Then they both kind of got a twinkle in their eye. And Kevin said, maybe we should wait a while to decide on the color. I'm thinking maybe pink, maybe blue. Generosity, the victory state. Terry loved to tell the story about the time she escaped being robbed. She had enrolled in a very, very expensive workshop, and the leader of the workshop had said, if you ever come late to any session, you're out for good. No excuses and no refunds. So when Terry spent a little too long at the local deli getting a sandwich and looked at her watch, she was making a beeline for her car. She was accosted partway down the sidewalk by a robber brandishing a knife who told her, give me your purse, give me your purse. She was so dead set on getting back to the meeting, she just straight armed him, headed straight to her car, said, I'm sorry, I don't have time, and didn't look back. She jumped in her car and took off, leaving the robber dumbfounded. Well, it was a good story, and Terry used to get a good crowd of people at the networking gatherings just by telling the story. But lately the story was getting a little worn with the telling of it, and she wasn't getting the crowds around her like she used to, and she was even kind of losing some of her active clients. In fact, she lost another one last week to Joseph. Why? The word was getting out that Terry wouldn't take your call in between appointments. You had to wait for your appointment. She was slow to answer emails and a little bit kind of snippy if you tried to ask her questions when you weren't paying for her services. So Terry didn't really know it, but that's why the people were starting to leave her. Generosity, the lost state. The next network gathering, Terry decided that she was going to figure out what Joseph's secret sauce was. He was signing up clients. She wasn't. He was stealing clients from her. She wanted to know what was the pitch that he was delivering because she wanted to know what his secret sauce was. So when she spotted Joseph sitting with a client, she found a way to maneuver herself and sit down where she could hear what he was saying without being seen by him. Trouble was, Joseph wasn't talking. The other guy was talking. On and on and on and on. Joseph wasn't saying anything. She kept wondering, when is he going to make his pitch? When is he going to make his pitch? Finally, the guy seemed to be winding down, and Terry was really listening up. This was the time. This was the time. And Joseph said, well, you know, Chuck, I really can't take you on as a client. You're really not my target customer, shall we say. But I can tell that you're really struggling with some decisions that might be going against your value system. So I'll tell you what, here's my card. It's got my cell number on there. If you want to talk to somebody, you know, just man to man, friend to friend, about any decisions that you might be struggling with, please feel free to call me. But I'm sorry I can't sign you up as a client because I can't have anything to do with a business that might be in danger of going sketchy, if you know what I mean. Then the two got up and left the area, leaving Terry dumbfounded. Generosity, the victory state. So, is generosity as simple as we think? Generosity, the struggle of generosity, has to do with the question of how much is enough. We saw that a little bit with gratitude as well, and they're linked in that respect. The animal model of generosity is the animal who, having eaten all he can, will not leave the carcass for other animals to eat from, but instead drags it up a tree and deposits it where the other animals can't touch it. And in fact, that gives us a really good indication of what the lost state of generosity is the issue of hoarding. Hoarding things that you no longer need, that our character no longer needs. Maybe in our character's case, hoarding things that he never needed. But as long as there is some sense that, oh, there might not be enough for me, I might not have enough, there's going to be the tendency to hoard. And it can relate to things besides just money. We can hoard our attention, we can hoard our time, we can hoard our money, of course, and we can even hoard contacts. If you feel that this person who's well connected, well, if I introduce that person to my friend, well, maybe my friend will get the benefit of the guy's contacts and I won't. So I don't want to tell my friend about this guy because I'm hoping he'll help me get connected with the people that I need. So there's many respects in which the hoarding can take place. The victory side of generosity is having a broadening heart, having a giving spirit, and it does enlarge the heart and makes us more open to others. So we see, of course, in generosity that empathy trait, because the empathy trait of generosity sees a need and immediately asks itself, what might I be able to do? What resources might I be able to bring to the situation? Of course, sometimes the answer to that question is, well, that's a nice impulse, but it's not appropriate. So it's circumspection has to come in there as well, because otherwise a person with generosity as a base trait might be going barefoot very soon if he doesn't also bring in a little bit of circumspection as well. Because generosity is an empathy trait, that of course means the only modifier is scale. And as with all empathy traits, what's at stake in the scale is relationships. But generosity has a strange situation that we haven't seen before. And that is a person who has a lack of generosity, a real lack of it, maybe generosity is in the pinnacle position, is going to be closed off to relationships. They're going to be closing themselves off to relationships. With what? With the suspicion that everybody's out to get some of what they've got. And in some ways, that can, in my estimation, now who am I? I'm not a psychologist, so this is my opinion only here, but it kind of makes me feel like maybe that would be a downside of being wealthy. Because if you ended up really wealthy, how would you know whether the people around you just wanted to know you for your money? So it does seem that inability to have generosity, that is of course well known to close off relationships. It is a member of the empathy group, and it has clusters with gratitude and generosity, and there's going to be a third member of this cluster in the empathy group. And what this cluster has in common is that they're in situations where our character or ourselves, if we're thinking of our lives, is in receipt of something good. And so this is our response. How do we respond to the good things that we receive? Do we respond with gratitude, paying it back with thankfulness? Do we respond with generosity, paying it forward? So that is what they have in common in the sympathy group. Not a terribly difficult trait, except when you deal with the question of when do you have to bring reason into generosity? It's not a balanced trait, but still the question is, what's the limiting factor then? Is there a limiting factor? And that I cannot answer for you. You're the creator of the story. So with that, we will turn to our systematic review of the character profile tool. Now, this is our third week. I had sort of hinted last week that we'd be done with all of this in the third week, but we're not. We're just going to cover the reference sheets. 2 weeks ago, we reviewed the character profile diagram. Last week, we reviewed the memory prompt list. And our work today will be reviewing the reference sheets. And we'll save transitions for our final week next week. So, reference sheets. I hope you've been making your reference sheets all along. Here's mine. Every week, I add a new character trait to our reference sheets. And if you've been making them all along, you know that you have a sheet with all of the character traits for balance, all of the character traits for empathy, for insight, and for resilience. And if you've been making them all along, you'll remember, and you'll be very familiar with the fact that for each of our character traits, we include what's the nature of the struggle, what's the loss state, and what's the victory state. I use these all the time. I hope you use them too. And that's why I've asked you to handwrite them and add to them each week. Because if you handwrite these character traits, it's going to stick with you so much better. I'm going to tell you a little story. I had a math teacher once in a trig class, trigonometry, and the teacher said that we could take a 4x6 file card and we could put anything we want on that 4x6 file card, and we could take that with us into the final exam. And you could look at it during the exam. No other books, no other materials, but anything you could write on that 4x6 card, you could take that with you into the exam. Boy, did I ever cram it. I had the tiniest handwriting you could imagine to cram everything onto that 4x6 card. And I took the test. You think I ever looked at that 4x6 card? I didn't, because it was all in my head from having written it out by hand. So that's a lot of what we're doing with these sheets, is that we're imprinting them into our brain cells. A mentor of mine, Scott Shepard, likes to call it neuroimprinting. And he recommends that we do a lot of that. He's the one that I learned all the stuff about the note box from, Zettelkasten, if you remember way back from the first lessons. So we're going to talk today in our review, what do we have them for? How do they work? Why did we make them? And what are we going to do with them? So let's go think of have all of our reference sheets handy and think of our zones of awareness. Because what we're going to use the reference sheets for is to determine the character profile diagram for a character who's already living in our head. If we already have a character in our head and our heart, but we don't quite know their character profile, how can you use the character profile to help shape the story? How can you use the character profile tool to get you back in the mood of the story, the emotions of your story, if you don't have a character profile tool? And the answer is the reference sheets are going to help you build that character profile tool. And here's the way we're going to work them. When you're going to be thinking about your character, and the first thing that I want your brain to focus on is focus on the zone of awareness, which is, of course, what we call the rudder traits. And I want you to go through briskly, very briskly, go through each of the traits that you have on your sheets and just visit them very, very briefly. We're going to focus on the struggle line, because the rudder traits, when you're making a decision, that's where a struggle is taking place. So you think of your character and just briskly look by. Orderliness, a sense that something's wrong, a struggle with keeping possessions in order. Just very quickly read the description and just kind of slide down, even touch with your fingers, slide down and just move briskly until something goes, aha, aha, aha. Struggle, holding his temper, focusing on others. Oh, that's my guy. That's my guy. He has trouble holding his temper. All right. So if he's actively struggling with holding his temper, that's the next question. Holding the temper really stuck out. It paused you. The trait will pause you. That's the point. Just read briskly, and when you get to the right thing, it'll stop you. And when it stops you, now it's time to go to this chart. Okay, temper is this guy's issue. All right, is he actively struggling to control his temper? Is he saying to himself when he goes to bed at night, darn, I got mad at my kid again today. What did I do that for? Well, then he's probably got it in a zone of awareness. If he has trouble losing his temper and is just the normal state of affairs is you just say 2 words to him and he gets angry with you and he throws his arm up and he hardly ever controls his temper, then he might be in the zone of chaos. And if he never ever even would think about it, you just look at him cross-eyed and he's angry, then it's probably the zone of aspiration. So you can see how I would imagine that if you're thinking about a struggle with temper, it's not very likely to be in the zone of stability, much less being in the zone of being. But you might have another trait that is. So let's play around a little bit more. So you've got your character and you're going down your stuff and you get to responsibility. Responsibility, the struggle with the animal guarding its food. The loss state is a failure to perform or failure to own up. The victory state is doing as we promised, accepting the consequences. But boy, the minute you saw that word responsibility, something stopped you. Well, maybe our guy has responsibility as a base trait. By golly, he comes home from work every night. By golly, he deposits his paycheck in the bank and he pays the bills. By golly, he does all the things he's supposed to do as a father, but he's not any good at keeping his temper. Okay, you've got an interesting character going here. You see how that works? And you just go through each of these. Now remember what the groups are about. So when you're going to focus in on it, you're going to say, okay, so we already talked about how is he at self-control? How is he at managing his life? That's you're in the balance group. You could be saying, how is he in his relationships to other people? That's going to be in the empathy group. Okay, how good is he at figuring things out? Now you're in the insight group. Or how much grit does he have? How much can he take? Yeah, you're in the resilience group. And so this is how you can feel your character and feel your way into a character profile diagram. And remember, of course, here we are with a typical character profile diagram, and I've done the colors to match the zones, but by now you guys are totally familiar with that. So when you got to that question on can he hold his temper, and you decided, nope, that's a wing trait. It's a wing trait for him. He's not doing too well. It's in the zone of chaos, and you're ready to place meekness in this character slot. Well, along with that, and you know from last week's lesson, you're going to log on the memory prompt list, you're going to put meekness, and you're going to create a tiny micro scenario that either shows an incident in his life that caused him to be that way, or a situation that illustrates it very well. So if it's a character that lives in your head and your heart, you might have one of those illustrating scenes that you would use. And in this case, our fellow, we said, very responsible. So he comes home from work. He's very tired because he's worked so responsibly at work, and he yells at his kid. So there you would be maybe putting that down as your micro scenario. Yells at his kid when he gets home from work. And that also begins to show the relationship between being responsibility as a base trait, where maybe it's weighing him down. You know, sometimes the anchor and the base can weigh you down. So there would be your responsibility. It would get its own line. What about that responsibility makes it so weighty? How did that happen? How did that take place? Oh, maybe they bought too big a house, and the payment is really got him on edge. And his sense of needing to make the payment, needing to meet inflation, he's working extra hours. That could possibly be a micro scenario. And so you would put that down there, struggling to keep up with house payments, determined to keep his family's home. So you can see now how these fit together so that you can, whether you construct your character profile diagram like we've done in the previous weeks, like last week we even drew some characters at random and slapped them down and then made stories to go along with them, or whether you study your character, find out their character profile and build the character profile diagram. Either way, you still get the result that you're looking for, which is a character profile diagram. And of course, the character profile diagram is a huge part of that Power of Living Characters, because that emotional ability, that ability that you will have when you sit down to write and you walk around your character profile and you touch each character trait and you feel the micro scenario, all you have to do is do that exercise and you'll be in the emotions of that character. Do it with the other character who's in that same scene, and you'll be ready to write that scene with just a couple of minutes of review, which is a huge part of the power of the character profile tool and the Power of Living Characters. Next week, we have one more aspect of the review, which is dealing with characters that are undergoing a journey, a transformational journey, where you don't have just one character profile diagram, but you have a from and a to, a before and an after. And then we'll talk about that transition and the journey and review how to create the aha moment in the mind of your character. So thank you so much for joining me today, and have a great week, and we'll see you again in another week. Bye-bye.